LeBron James all the way in. Here comes Simmons the other way. 3-on-2. Simmons eludes the defender and lays it in with that. Certainly the length altered that shot. Out of the quick steps.
All right, we got to talk about a little bit more of Cavs talk. Someone who's large and in charge. Who's better than the owner himself, Dan Gilbert? Apparently, according to a lot of league sources, Dan Gilbert is running the Cavs front office.
No kidding.
So, I mean, as you could tell by the trades that he made, obviously, Kyrie Irving was one of the biggest ones. What do we think of Dan Gilbert as the GM, front office type of guy?
Terrible. Just atrocious. You know, like in the whole trade, the whole Griffin firing over the offseason was a bad call, obviously. And just like you could see, like, I wonder if the whole thing, and I don't know if this has ever been talked about or confirmed by anybody, is more what I should say. Did Griffin get fired because he didn't want to accept the trade?
No, I just think they didn't offer him an extension. So, like, I think he was due up for an extension, and they just decided, you know what, we're just going to let you go, and we're going to hire Dave Altman, or whatever his name is.
Kobe
Altman. Oh, I went Dave Altman.
Dave Altman. I don't know. Whatever the case is, I think it's all but been confirmed that Dan Gilbert was the person who pushed through the Kyrie for Isaiah Thomas trade. I mean, he should be revoked from making any trades in the NBA after that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Dan Gilbert is that he obviously wants to run it his way.
Yeah.
Now that he's won his championship, because I think the consensus and the idea was that if Cleveland at least won one championship, because it's been the first championship in 50?
I thought it was like 65
60, 65,
I'll look it up.
50 plus years since they won like a championship in Ohio. So when you see that, you obviously, Dan Gilbert's in his mind's just thinking, you know what? I've already won my championship. I've already dealt with LeBron because obviously those two have a history with each other.
Yeah.
I don't have to listen to him anymore because we've already won our championship, and that was the one thing that he promised.
It was 52 years, by the way.
Yeah.
You were right. I think this is like a weird... they're getting back to that breaking point where I felt like the Cavaliers or Dan Gilbert and LeBron James had the first time around. And it seems like it's about to happen again, where it's already starting to...
History repeats itself.
Yeah, like the seams are starting to show, and the fact that they came back together was a little surprising after how it ended the first time. And maybe the wounds or scars that were left the first time never really healed all the way up.
They didn't stitch it up. They just kind of left it open.
Basically, yeah, because now you can see that this is like, it's still there. Dan Gilbert doesn't necessarily want LeBron making decisions, and Dan Gilbert wants to make those decisions, but he makes them poorly. So it's not good for anyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to it, Dan Gilbert was the one that kind of didn't want to get LeBron any pieces when he was in Cleveland. I mean, his best player was what? Zydrunas Ilgauskas? How can you have Varejao, Zydrunas, Boobie Gibson, Delonte?
Hey, let's not talk.
I love Boobie Gibson. Don't get me wrong. I love Boobie.
Boobie's a classic.
Boobie is a classic player, and if you remember him, salute to you guys. Those players were good, and we remember them. But
I love Boobie Gibson.
But the thing with that is that those players are not NBA championship caliber players. Those are players that you can role play. They can, be a role player in the.
I mean, to be fair, as much as I love Boobie Gibson, he shouldn't have been playing in the NBA.
Exactly. Well, he should have been at least off the bench at least.
Like maybe 10 minutes.
And then we also had Jamario Moon, if you remember him.
Oh my gosh, that Cleveland Cavaliers team was terrible.
Just think about it. And I think their best player that they brought in for him before he left was Mo Williams.
Yeah. Well, remember, and then I think one of their other better players was Delonte West at one point.
Too. Yeah, I mean, that was another trade, and then that just became...
That was something. else. We won't talk about that right now, even though there is some rumblings that there's something else similar afoot in the NBA.
There might be something similar afoot, but, besides that, this is where, it's kind of hypocritical for Dan Gilbert to write the letter to LeBron in the first place where he told him, we'll win a championship before you. dude, you've exiled him because you decided to make poor decisions in the front office, and that's what led you for him to leave first. So now that you're making decisions again for the organization, I don't want to see letter 2.0, and I don't want to see you complain when your franchise, in terms of how much it's worth, goes down a little bit because you lose the best player in the NBA.
When you lose the franchise.
Or in
LeBron
history, I
is
should
the
say.
Franchise, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's craziness, you know? It's absolutely insane because Dan Gilbert owes the success of the Cleveland Cavaliers entirely to LeBron James.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to debate that it's not. This franchise is where it is now because of LeBron James.
Mm-hmm.
It was still relevant even when he wasn't on the team because of the fact that he had played there and because he was from Cleveland.
Yeah.
People still talked about that team even though they were terrible while he was gone. And they made one of the worst first-round number one picks of all time in Anthony Bennett. They were still relevant because of LeBron James. And then he came back, won you guys a championship, you know.
Yeah, could have been 2, potentially.
Could have been 2, and, you know, he's brought you guys to the finals for the last 3 years in a row or 4 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And, you know, he's obviously rubbing LeBron the wrong way, you know.
Yeah.
In the sense that he first of all, he made the trade of Kyrie for Isaiah Thomas. Then he didn't make the Kevin Love for Paul George trade, which LeBron is upset about. And then he didn't he didn't do the Kyrie for Bledsoe in the number 3 pick trade, you know. The holes are everywhere in this Cleveland Cavaliers organization. There's so many things coming apart at the seams that whatever it is, just they need to blow the whole thing up into a million smithereens, you know? It's got to change.
Yeah, I mean, the worst part is that they didn't even bring back David Griffin, who was probably one of the GMs that made some of those great moves in the beginning. So it just kind of shocks me and surprises me that Dan Gilbert has decided to put his nose in business where he's not very good at. And he hasn't learned anything. And he hasn't learned from his mistakes from the time LeBron James was drafted to where he's at now, where he could potentially leave again.
The thing that really confuses me with Dan Gilbert as an owner / GM type guy is that the things that he lets LeBron make decisions on sometimes and the things that he doesn't are crazy. Like he let LeBron get David Blatt get fired, right? Which is one of the bigger mistakes I feel like they've made in the sense that they went and got Ty Lue as their coach. Mm-hmm. That's a big mistake. David Blatt is a much higher potential coach, and he's a much better coach in general than Ty Lue is, in my opinion. I think you kind of feel the same way about those two guys. But he let LeBron essentially make that decision for the franchise, that David Blatt was not their coach, which is not necessarily something LeBron should really have a say in as a player on the team. Whereas going out and getting a player that LeBron would rather play with or a player that LeBron thinks is better, which I would trust his opinion much more on rather than a coach, LeBron has no say in that for some reason. Yeah. Which I shouldn't say no say because they do like sign players that LeBron wants to get paid, you know, like J.R. Smith, Tristan Thompson. LeBron wanted those guys to get paid. But when it comes to making a trade for like Paul George, there's no way that Paul George doesn't improve every facet of that team over Kevin Love. No. And that's not a slight at Kevin Love, but it's just that's what they need is a Paul George type player for that team. And it's just crazy to me that he would listen to LeBron on certain things and not other things that make more sense for his input.
Yeah. You ready to move on to the next Dan Gilbert story?
Let's move on to more Dan Gilbert, the best GM in basketball.
Well,